Here they come. Here they come, hon. Hello. Get the legs going. Get the legs going, huh? Okay, as you can see, I've got the chuck all jacked up. Milo, get out of the way. Come on, come lay down. Come here, come lay down. I got all jacked up. It's got a little bit of a gangster lean going on, and that's because when I first bought this truck long ago, a few years ago, it had a bad sending unit, and so the fuel level sending unit was bad. It was, you know, come and go. You just had to make sure you had enough gas in it, but it was problematic. Most recently, though, the fuel pump decided, hey, if that guy's not going to work, I'm not going to work either. So it's jacked up. I'm going to pull that whole sending unit out and replace it, but it's not a big deal. I want to take the opportunity before I jump back into this thing and let you guys know I'm revisiting one of the things I did recently. It was really, really cool, and that's the junkyard supercharger. So you take a look at this photo I'm going to put up. That's where we ran that M90 supercharger from the 3800 Series 2 V6 on the 4.8 liter. And I thought it was a really good idea. It's super cool, you know, gets kind of like Boneyard Boost. You go to the junkyard, pick up a supercharger, works good, put it on a 4.8, and you know, you should be able to get at least a little bit of extra torque. The problem was, and obviously it didn't work out. I mean, I got the supercharger running, got the belt all lined up, got the plate mounted. So what I did was make an adapter plate so I could bolt that supercharger assembly on top of the Holley high ram. And that worked out good. I thought, hey, this is awesome. The problem is that it didn't make any boost and it didn't make any power. And if you do the math and you look at it objectively, there's a reason it didn't do that. And that's because this supercharger was designed to run on a 240 horsepower V6 application. And the way that the supercharger works, any positive displacement supercharger, it basically just moves air from one side of the blower to the other. I mean, in a twin screw, there's actually internal compression, which is really good and makes them very efficient. But on a roots blower, it grabs air from this side, from the top side of the blower, and moves it over to the bottom side. And it does that every revolution. So it's pulsing the air and beating it up, and which is why it's not terribly efficient and not nearly as efficient as a twin screw. And the later versions like this TVS 2650, every generation of new root supercharger tends to get closer and closer towards towards a twin screw, which is more efficient. So, but anyway, this early one that we use is M90. Not terribly efficient, and also not sized very big. I mean, the supercharger, a positive displacement supercharger, since it provides a fixed amount of air for every revolution, moves it from one side to the other, it has to be sized to move a given amount of air relative to the motor. And that supercharger was sized by Eaton for that combination for GM to move a certain amount of air. Now, if we can take a look at the differences, and that motor was rated at 240 horsepower and it made about 7 or 8 pounds with that supercharger. But if we ran that motor on the engine dyno the way that we run, and I know because I've done this, they make closer to 300 horsepower. And that's because we run them with open exhaust and an open throttle body and an optimized tune and usually an electric water pump, and everything is much better. So let's say that supercharger, that M90, if we're spinning it at the speed that we spin it at, because it still had the factory 3.8 inch pulley on it. So if we're spinning that supercharger, let's pick a number, let's say it's 6,000 RPM, it's providing enough airflow. And we're going to even assume, because there's a difference between providing that blower speed on a 3.8 liter versus doing it on a 4.8. And as we see, it means that there's basically no boost on the 4.8. So it's providing a certain amount of airflow, and because the motor in the case of the 3.8 liter, the 3800, is not using all that airflow, we see a restriction between the blower and the motor, and that's what we see as boost. Now, when we tried to run, so let's say that if we were to run it with no restriction, that supercharger at that speed, let's say that it could support, you know, it has a 350 horsepower worth of airflow. We'll just pick a number here. And so at that speed, with that blower pulley spinning that RPM, that blower processes enough air to support 350 horsepower. Well, the problem is when you take that 350 horsepower worth of air and put it on a 400 horsepower naturally aspirated 4.8, it's not going to make any power. And that's exactly what it did. I mean, we saw a little bit of boost down low, like 1.5 pounds, and people were wondering, well, did you not close the bypass valve? You know, it's not my first rodeo. I used to own a company called Ram Air Technology, and all we did was the performance modifications for these 3800 Series 2 motors. So I have a lot of experience with those. And also we videotaped it, and we also tried zip tying the thing closed. So we wanted to make sure that that was the case. And it's not the bypass valve. It's actually the relationship between how much air the supercharger is processing and how much air the 4.8 liter is actually using. And so the 4.8 liter at 400 horsepower is using more air than our 350 horsepower worth of air supercharger is processing. So it's just simple math. And the other problem with that, the other thing that the supercharger, this M90, has going against it, is that there's also parasitic loss associated with driving that supercharger. So let's say it supplies 350 horsepower worth of air. Well, in order to do that, because it's a big pump, it takes power away from the motor to process that air. So if it takes 50 horsepower to drive that supercharger, then we have to subtract the 50 horsepower from that total. So that gives us a 300 horsepower blower in our example. So when we run a 300 horsepower blower on our combination, on our 400 horsepower combination, the results are kind of predictable. There's no boost because it's not flowing enough air to create boost because the motor is not a restriction. And think about it this way, if we were to put that supercharger spinning that speed and that size on a 500 horsepower motor or a 600 horsepower motor, we would actually see vacuum between the supercharger and the motor. It would actually be sucking on the supercharger. So we're just kind of in between it providing boost and it creating vacuum. We're kind of in the middle there. We're kind of right at the 0 point. So anyway, that supercharger didn't have enough airflow spinning that speed to feed our 4.8. So here is the key, and this is what I'm going to do in my next trip down to West Tech. We're going to try to modify this M90 early gen supercharger and see if we can improve it. So we're going to do that by speeding the blower up. I'll put a hub on it and we'll put some interchangeable pulleys on it so we can speed the supercharger up. That's one thing. The other thing I'm going to do is probably cut the snout off where the throttle body is, because a positive displacement supercharger wants to have all of the airflow that you can possibly give it. So it wants all the airflow all the time. Now obviously you can also port the inlet into the supercharger and port the discharge side and do all that. I probably won't go to those levels. What I'll do is I'll cut the snout off, we'll weld on a flange, I can put a really big throttle body on it, and we'll call it good and see how much that helps. Because ultimately, that M90 is sized to produce a given amount of flow and a given amount of power. And I think that we're kind of past that, even if we optimize it and do everything that we can. Now, obviously the answer to one not being enough is to install two. And that's super cool, and I'm all in on that. I love the people that are out there doing that. And as a gee-whiz thing, it's super cool. Like I said, there's not logic behind it, there's expense behind it, there's too much expense behind it, there's all sorts of reasons not to do it. But because it's two superchargers and it's awesome, there's definitely a reason to do it. But right now, I'm going to take the more logical approach, and we'll speed this one up and see what we can do, improve the airflow into it. Now, the next step would be to install one of the later generation M90s that they used in the later 3800s. You definitely can do that, and it's definitely a better supercharger. The problem is you don't see as many of those available, and I haven't ever seen any in the wrecking yards, as you do these earlier M90s. So they're a little bit harder to come by. But even that will kind of be limited. So the next step up from there is, and this is the route that we chose, I'm going to put an M112 supercharger on it from an 03-04 Cobra. And the reason we're doing that is because it's an available supercharger. It's a little hard to find also, but we happen to have one. My buddy Mark Sanchez hooked me up. He has an 03 Cobra motor that needs to be rebuilt. So the supercharger assembly is just sitting there. So I'm going to run that supercharger, and all I have to do is basically make new mounting holes for our plate, I think, and mount that supercharger, and we can run that blower on the 4.8. Now we know that that thing is capable of, 550 or 600 horsepower, so we definitely should see some boost. The problem I have with going that route is that I'd like to also run the intercooler, and I don't think the intercooler will fit down in the valley of the high ram, so we might have to come up with something else. What I'm thinking maybe is the dual quad top that they sell for the high ram. If I make my plate attached to that instead of the lower portion of the high ram, I think we can install that supercharger with the intercooler, which would be cool, because the intercooling would be good. Not that we're going to run a bunch of boost. Even that blower is not going to make a ton of boost on a motor that's already making 400 horsepower, but it's always better to have intercooling than not. So that's one thing I'm going to look at. We're going to try that. I purchased one of the superchargers from, I think it's from the North Star motor the guys are selling. The only thing that's different about that is that encloses the intercooler, which is cool, but it also has runners that come off of the top and go down. So I don't know if it's too wide to work with the high ram. I think that it is, but I have a backup plan. The guys at Speedmaster sell a dedicated lower manifold for the LS, and it's designed to fit a big 671 or 871 supercharger. So I might be able to just make another plate for that and mount this other blower. So we've got a lot of cool stuff to take a look at. So we got the M90, we've got some upgrades to that. We'll try spinning it faster and stuff. And then we've got this 03 Cobra supercharger, and we'll also probably try to take a look at this other version that I got, which I think is from the Cadillac deal. So we've got a lot of cool stuff coming up. While I'm down there, I'm also gonna do the Sloppy Stage 2 cam test versus the world. So I got a bunch of cams, we're gonna run them NA and turbocharged, and so guys can see, hey look, they did this NA and they also did this supercharged, or turbocharged. So, you know, every cam is a turbo cam. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. I gotta climb back under this truck and fix this fuel pump. Thanks for watching.